Welcome back to another episode of Warren Cali. In this episode, I will detail the story of Big Sleep from Q102 East Coast Crip. The way life works, the early foundation in your childhood can play a role in the outcome. Studies show that this happens because early trauma affects stress response, as well as your flight or fight response, as well as your neurodevelopment, which gets off track from traumatic experiences. The earlier the intervention in a kid's life, the greater the chance that treatment can help, especially for trauma early in childhood, when a person develops behaviors to deal with early childhood trauma. Changing those habits later in life could be more difficult. But most kids growing up in the hood never get therapy or the help they need from the various traumatic experiences they may have faced, and that leads to, in most cases, many kids turning out to be bad or having a lot of struggle and pain throughout the years of their lives. And that leads us to the story of Big Sleep. Big Sleep was born Kobe Kinkalow around 1973 and will grow up in South Central Los Angeles. By 1973, Los Angeles began to have a wave of gangs form all throughout the county, most notably South Central. And on the east side of South Central, it became known for the early formation of the Crips, which later, as we all know now, became bigger than just LA. It became worldwide. But during the 70s, Big Sleep was just a child. His life wasn't revolved around the streets, but with the toll life put on him, eventually his life would turn to the streets. Sleep's early childhood was painful. At just 7 years old, he lost his father to leukemia. Losing your father that early can deeply affect anyone. Fathers serve a role as a protector, provider, display wisdom and guidance, and also instill morals. As a young man, not having a father figure around can lead to seeking male role models in other forms to make up for that missed factor. Losing one parent is traumatic enough, and in Sleep's case, his childhood only got worse after that point. The next year, just at 8 years old, Sleep's mom will also lose her life. Unlike his father, Sleep's mother's death was gruesome. She was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Sleep, only at the age of 8 years old, was brought to the scene of the crime, where he seen his mom being carried out and seen the bloody outcome of her death inside the home where he lived. Seeing this scene and the loss of both of his parents set the stage of what Sleep's life would ultimately turn out to be. His life was never the same. He began to act out and wouldn't listen to anyone, feeling I don't have parents, so nobody can tell me what to do. And all the trauma that he faced eventually led to Sleep joining the streets and joining the gang in his early childhood. The east side of South Central by the 80s and 90s was fully gang infested, and violence in LA was at an all-time high. It was rare at a point for kids growing up in the hood to not claim a gang. Sleep began to associate himself with a gang called the Q102 East Coast Crips. Q102 are a part of an alliance of the East Coast Crip gangs, which includes 1st Street East Coast Crip, 5'9 East Coast Crip, the 6 Pack, which includes 6 Deuce, 6'6, 6'8, and 6'9 East Coast Crip, 7'6 East Coast Crip as well, along with 8'9 East Coast Crip, 9'7, 11'8 East Coast Crip, 190, and 1200 Block East Coast Crip. Jumping in the streets will lead to Sleep facing life or death situations and jail time for several crimes to benefit his gang, and also his current case he currently is behind bars for. On April 2016, several members of the Q102 East Coast Crips, including Little Hitman, entered the Kush Kings Medical Dispensary on South San Pedro Street. Little Hitman knew the owner and led other gang members in discussions to tax the dispensary. On April 30th, 2016, Little Hitman and others asked Martin, a security guard at Kush Kings, if they could speak to the owner. Martin told them to come back that night. The East Coast Crips later returned around 10:30 p.m. that night with several other gang members in attendance. They parked near the entrance of the dispensary. The owner was still not there. According to Martin, the security guard, Little Hitman and another gang member threatened to shoot the business up if the owner did not appear. Martin and Dominique, another employee, testified they were frightened because the gang members were blocking the dispensary door, as well as Martin and Dominique cars, which were parked in the front on the street. Dominique, who believed Little Hitman had a gun, pretended to call the owner, but instead called the police. The police arrived to the scene and surrounded the building and arrested the gang members at the scene. A videotape for security cameras of the business was later played for the jury. No firearms were recovered from the people found at the dispensary. In July 2016, Little Hitman, Baby Hitman, and Big Sleep and several other gang members developed a plan to tax the business next to the Eco Recycling on South Main Street. A woman named Chanel had seen several people moving equipment for growing marijuana into the building. When Chanel knocked on the door and asked what was going on, a man threatened her with a gun and told her to mind her own business. Chanel later told Little Hitman, Baby Hitman, and Big Sleep about the incident, and they went back with her to the grow house. The man who had threatened Chanel was not there, but gang members learned the grow house was owned by a brother-in-law of a man named Hector, the owner of the Eco Recycling. Hector offered to set up a meeting with his brother-in-law, who was the owner. Hector, however, delayed in arranging a meeting with his brother-in-law. After several days of watching the grow house, Little Hitman and Big Sleep directly approached the owner. They told him an agreement would have to be reached for pulling the gun on Chanel, and displayed the gang attended to tax his business. Little Hitman and Big Sleep reported to the other gang members in their hood that the owner had agreed to pay 5 pounds of weed and $10,000 per month to compensate the gang and to continue to operate in their hood. Hector will handle the agreement on behalf of the owner. But Hector, he procrastinated, telling Little Hitman and Big Sleep he did not have the money. Eventually, he provided Big Sleep with some money and some weed on behalf of the grow house, which was shared among the gang members in his hood. The amount of money and weed was less than the amount agreed upon, so Big Sleep returned to the Eco Recycling Center, and Hector was again putting them off. The East Coast Crips believed that Hector was taking a cut of the amount they were supposed to be paid. They decided he had to face retaliation. Although Chanel did not accompany Little Hitman, Big Sleep, and Baby Hitman when they went back and visited the Eco Recycling, they told her their return with Baby Hitman, and Baby Hitman had 2 guns, including an AR-15. Big Sleep told Hector he represented all Crips, and if Hector wanted to stay in business, he would have to pay money. Hector denied anyone associated with his business had pointed a gun at Chanel, but agreed to talk to Big Sleep and Little Hitman the next day. The next day, Big Sleep and Little Hitman demanded $2,000 for the incident with Chanel, and monthly payments of the same amount to operate the recycling business. After that conversation, Hector purchased and installed security cameras outside of the Eco Recycling office. Throughout the rest of June, Hector resisted Big Sleep and Little Hitman's request for money by inviting them to smoke and drink with him, while claiming he had not received money from his brother-in-law. Hector later stated he was afraid of the gang and used a friendly demeanor to defuse the situation. Sometime in June, Big Sleep and Little Hitman told Hector he owed money for June and July, as well as penalties, and demanded that he pay $10,000. On July 27, 2016, after having been put to the side multiple times, Big Sleep and Little Hitman entered the Eco Recycling office and demanded money. Hector, feeling threatened, did not resist. Little Hitman took approximately $7,000 from a desk drawer and put it in a bag and left. Half an hour later, Little Hitman returned accompanied by his brother, Baby Hitman, and another gang member named James. He demanded another $3,000. Big Sleep followed a few minutes later, and Baby Hitman had a pistol, and James had an assault rifle. Baby Hitman threatened Hector and pointed his gun at Hector's employee. Baby Hitman began opening drawers and took a gun that belonged to Hector. Big Sleep told Baby Hitman to calm down and put the gun back, but Baby Hitman refused to give it back. Big Sleep, Little Hitman, and James then left the office, but Baby Hitman continued to make threats and told Hector he would need $3,000 to get his gun back. As Baby Hitman walked out the office, he stumbled and turned around, and he pointed his 2 guns at everyone inside the office. Hector believed that Baby Hitman was waiting to shoot his employee and him if they left the office. Hector later closed the recycling center after the incident. He eventually reported the crime to the police and provided the video surveillance footage, which was later played for the jury. The video showed when entering the office that Baby Hitman had his hands in his pocket as if he was concealing a weapon, and James was moving swiftly. After leaving, Baby Hitman withdrew the 2 guns from his pocket and aimed them at the door, which was shown on camera. Los Angeles detectives later stated that Little Hitman, Big Sleep, Baby Hitman, and James had been arrested after being identified in a video by local officers who were familiar with the Q102s. Chanel later stated to police that she had stolen a revolver and a house lick, which she later sold to Big Sleep. The gun was later recovered at Big Sleep's apartment. During the trial, Little Hitman was the only person to tell his side. Little Hitman admitted that him, Baby Hitman, and Big Sleep were members of the Q102 East Coast Crips. According to Little Hitman, he was a patient at Kush Kings and had developed a business relationship with the owner, purchasing large amounts of marijuana for resale. On April 30th, 2016, he was turned away from the business when he could not produce his medical certificate. He said Martin, the security guard, told him to come back later, when the owner was expected to be there. When Little Hitman said he returned with his fellow gang members, Martin told him he had not been able to reach the owner. When Little Hitman waited for the Martin to call the owner, again, the police arrived. Little Hitman said he never threatened anyone and had only intended to buy weed. Addressing the robbery at Eco Recycling, Little Hitman stated he became involved with Chanel, told him someone at the grow shop had pulled a gun on her. Little Hitman and Big Sleep accompanied her to speak with the owner of the shop. The owner told them to step around to speak with his business partner, which was Hector. At Eco Recycling, the grow shop owner explained the situation to Hector, who invited Little Hitman and Big Sleep to come back the next day to discuss amends. According to Little Hitman, no threats were made, and the tone of conversation was civil. The next day, Hector told the security guard who threatened Chanel would be fired, and Hector and his business partner would sell them weed at a cheap price. Soon after, Hector, who was friendly to them, shared samples, which they smoked, and they all drank at the eco-recycling office. Little Hitman brought weed from Hector multiple times and sold it to his clients. He arranged to buy a pound of weed from Baby Hitman and paid Hector $1,600 in advance, he said. Little Hitman and Big Sleep received the weed from Hector, but when Baby Hitman examined it, he told Little Hitman the amount was short. Little Hitman said he returned to the eco-recycling office. Hector's employee was sitting near the door with a gun in his lap. Hector had a rifle, he said, and another handgun was on the desk. Little Hitman told Hector the weed was short and asked to swap it for another bag sitting on the table, which Hector refused. Little Hitman then said Baby Hitman then walked in, visibly angry, and was followed by James. Although Little Hitman didn't see either with a weapon, Hector's employee responded to Baby Hitman with an aggressive manner and said he was a blood. Hector told everyone to chill and be cool. Little Hitman stated what happened next was that Big Sleep walked in and Hector told him to get control of his boys. James asked why Hector and his employee had guns out and if they were being set up. Hector denied it and said it was no setup. He said he could not reach the grow shop owner. He offered his guns as collateral. Little Hitman left and assumed the fellow gang members left with him. Little Hitman received 22 years plus 4 life sentences. The sentence consisted of a life term for conspiracy to commit extortion after eco-recycling and doubled as a second strike sentence to 14 years to life, plus 5 years for prior serious felony convictions, plus a consecutive life term for conspiracy to commit extortion at Kush Kings, and doubled to 14 years to life, plus a consecutive term of 12 years for assault with a semi-automatic firearm. Baby Hitman will face the same charges, and he received life as well, and his earliest parole date is in 2052. At trial, Big Sleep received 3 life sentences, plus 106 years. He is now 52 years old, and his earliest parole date is in 2041. His charges range from conspiracy, robbery, extortion, gang enhancements, and several other things. Big Sleep has been in jail since 2016, and he is still hopeful about a release one day. This will conclude this episode. If you haven't already, check out my previous episodes. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.